his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Which of you, wishing to construct a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if there's enough for its completion? Otherwise, after laying the foundation and finding himself unable to finish the work, the onlookers would laugh at him and say, "This one began to build, but did not have the resources to finish." Or what king, marching into battle, would not first sit down and decide whether with 10,000 troops he can successfully oppose another king, advancing upon him with 20,000 troops? But if not, while he was still far away, he will send a delegation to ask for peace terms. In the same way, any of you who does not renounce all his possessions cannot be my disciple. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
I think we spend a lot of our time in life reconciling what we think is important and what God tells us what is important. Now, I think you can see the dilemma there. On the one hand, if we discern our own priorities, it's fairly simple. We can do a meditation. We can discern what we think our priorities are. We can ask our friends. We can look at our own life experiences. We can determine what our own priorities are, but reconciling them to what God thinks is important. Now that's hard, isn't it? So the dilemma here is we can do one side pretty easily, but perhaps we won't take the time or the resources, the energy to determine, well, what does God think is important? What are God's priorities in my life? So how can I reconcile the two if I only spend time on my own priorities and not in God's priorities? In today's wisdom reading, it says, "The earthen vessel weighs down the mind. It has many concerns." So our many concerns in our life weigh us down, give us very little time to reconcile what God's priorities are. We're so weighed down with our earthly concerns. Now, I think I'm in a pretty unique position in my life right now. In half my life now, I've been in one camp, and now in the second half of my life, I've been trying to get into the other camp. So the first half of my life, I pretty much knew what was right, and I knew the priorities, I knew what was going on, and I had control of my life. That was the first half of my life. And I think the second half of my life now, I've tried to do more listening to find out what God's priorities are in my life. And so if you believe I'm 40 years old, that's about 20 years and 20 years, right? Some say it's 30 and 30. So why is that important? Why is it important to listen? Because if we don't listen, we don't know how to make the right choices. And a lot of life is about choices, choosing life over death, choosing blessings over curses. So in my first half of my life, in my relationships, I tend to choose death over life more often. My relationships, I mentioned before, I think, that I was married before, very destructive relationship, meaningless, self-serving on my part too. Not choosing life, but choosing death instead. And the second half of my life, I hope that I have chosen life more with Linda and my children. Making that choice to be life-giving to somebody else. That's choosing life and not death. In my childhood, I think in my first half of my life, I chose curses instead of blessings. Left to my own devices, I was very hard to handle. I was in the juvenile court system a few times. So I was a curse to my parents, I'm sure, and not a blessing. It was my choices, I chose to do. But I hopefully, in my second half of my life now, which coincidentally, I've been married for 30 years. So if you believe the 30-30 combination, that's 30 and 30, right? So 30 years. I've been married now, second half of my life. I think that I've chosen blessings over curses in my own parenting skills and how I make choices in my career and in making sure that I spend time with my family and my church and not so much with the career, making a choice for a blessing to my family and to my community. And my priorities in my first half of my life, again, not choosing life, choosing to convert my gifts and talents to my own benefit instead of for others. And then hopefully in my second half of my life, my choices are more towards blessings to convert my gifts and talents to others. But choosing life and choosing blessings, you know it takes a discipline. Like I said at the beginning, if I want to figure out what God's priorities are, it takes a discipline to do that. Reading scriptures, taking time for prayer, and hanging out with the right kind of people. It's a discipline that you have to make that choice. If you want to choose life and you want to choose blessings, that's a discipline. It's work. It doesn't come naturally. It's something you have to work at. The earthen vessel weighs down the mind that has many concerns. It's a lot of work to get up from under all of those earthly concerns. So reconciling our lives to God has been done before, hasn't it? Jesus reconciled our life to God once. And so one time you were reconciled to God, but through our life we have distanced ourselves from God all the time. So reconciliation is an ongoing process. It's not just once and for all and you're done. Reconciliation is an ongoing process because our earthly concerns are weighing us down, separating us from God all the time. And we have to work at that discipline to always bring ourselves back to God. It's a discipline to make those choices of life, those choices of blessings. And just like Paul, when he reconciled the master and the slave, Philemon and Onesimus, and so did Jesus reconcile us to God. And just like Paul, we can be that instrument of reconciliation in our own lives for others. You can forgive debts. If you give without expectation of return, you're forgiving debts because you're giving without expectation of return. You can heal ancient hurts, people that you have hurt and you're now estranged from. Perhaps even more than people, maybe a whole group of people that you're prejudiced against. You can bring yourself to reconcile with those people. Same thing with families, reconciling families that you've been long estranged from. You can take the time, the discipline to choose life, to choose blessings. When you reach out to your brother and your sister, reach out for reconciliation to your brothers and sisters. And then when you reach out for God to help you with the graces to do that, you bring all together, then you find yourself on the cross. And there's always a cost when you find yourself on the cross. In the gospel reading today, Jesus talks about that, putting God ahead of your family, putting God ahead of your life, putting God ahead of all your possessions, putting God first. That's the cost of carrying the cross. Remember that BP oil guy who was in charge, and he was doing a reconciliation because BP oil had dirtied the environment in the Gulf, and he had reconciled that with all the people that he hurt, right? So the reconciliation that he was doing, he gave up a lot. He gave up his life, his possessions, his time with his family. He was paying the price. He was carrying the cost for BP oil. But then you remember what he said one day? I want my life back. I got on fire. I want my life back. Because carrying the cross was too much for him. He couldn't carry the cross. And don't we feel the same way sometimes? Carrying the cross is too much. I can't carry the cross. It's too much of a cost. Give my life, my possessions, my family. I can't carry this cross. But you have to choose life, and you have to choose blessings. And if you do that, if you put God ahead of your family will not disown you. They will be better off for it if you put God first ahead of your family. So when Jesus said today in the gospel that you have to hate your mother, your brother, your sister, and your family, he doesn't mean hate them like you want to disown them. He means that you put God first. That's what he's saying. If you put God first, then you can carry the cross. You can carry all those burdens, the cost of carrying the cross. So you have to reconcile your life with God all the time. It's a discipline that you have to take on to reconcile, continuously reconciling your life with God's priorities. And then you can choose life, and you can choose blessings.